Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched, were so proudly streaming, and the rockets sprinkling, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you.
Please remain standing. We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll have a short invocation. So if you would, again, face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you would, bear with me. Have to put on my glasses. Heavenly Father, we ask that you join us here today to enlighten each of us to what we can do to protect our children and grandchildren. We ask that you guide our panelists to bring their expertise to this issue and to be able to share what they know with us in a way that will bring us together with a call to action. We ask that our call to action will spur our elected leaders to enact the needed changes that will keep our children and grandchildren safe when in school. We ask that you fill each of us with the desire to go forward with the ideas we learned today and actively pursue a course of action that will result in the outcome we so seriously need. And finally, Father, we ask for blessings and protection on our students, teachers, staff, and administrators. We ask that you help enlighten our school board members and our legislators that they may see what needs to be done and have the will and wisdom to enact our program to the benefit of all. For your blessings on our endeavor, we pray. Amen. Okay, you can be seated now. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. We believe that our dedicated team has put together a program that will be beneficial for everybody if we can get it started. So we'll start with that. Now, our sponsors today, we want to thank them, are Swivel, that's the Southwest Institute for Violence-Free Learning, CPAC, the Southern Arizona Conservative Political Advisors Company, Gardner A.G. Anderson, and Oath Keepers. And I'm sure some of you would like to know something about Oath Keepers, so I'm going to do something a little unusual here. I'm going to give myself the oath, and then we'll go from there. So we would say, I, Paul Fitch, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I take this obligation freely and without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. And these oaths have no expiration date. Now, are there any oath keepers in the audience? If you would stand up, please. Oath keepers out there too? Okay, all right, are there any veterans, current serving military or police, retired? You would stand. Thank you for your service. And finally, do we have any candidates for office that might want to be recognized? So we have an important election coming up. Okay. Well, thank you all for your attendance. As far as housekeeping goes, fire escapes are over here and there, and back here if you need it. So don't go upstairs if you have a problem. The bathrooms, you'll go out this door, out to the end of the hallway and take a left, and the next hallway on the left is the bathroom. We'd ask that you turn your cell phones off, or at least down to vibrate if you feel that you need to know if you're going to get called. There's no smoking in the theater, but you can't eat. And finally, we're going to be holding questions until we have our breakout session after the presentations. So there won't be any questions from the floor until everybody's moved outside. Okay, I wanted to tell you a little personal story. A couple weeks ago, I was a victim. The Drexel Heights Fire Department and the Sheriff's Department were putting on an active school shooter medical training program. And so I volunteered to go and help because it's good to have victims that the fire department medics can work with. And so they gave me a really nasty bullet wound right here below my left knee. And I said, well, I'm kind of familiar with that because I have a real bullet wound on this side that I got in Vietnam, but they didn't want to use that one. Anyway, the program was put on by IC-SAVE, an organization that Mark Lytle works for, or works with, I guess. We don't work for them, they don't pay you, do they? IC-SAVE is a voluntary organization of professionals in safety items, and their IC-SAVE stands for Integrated Community Solutions for Active Violence Events. And they do training for police and fire, first responders mainly. They also put on classes for instance, Stop the Bleed. Mark gave us a class for our CERT organization. We got John and Peggy back there in their CERT t-shirts. CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team. And if you have any questions about CERT, those are the people to see. There's another organization called FASTER, which is Faculty Administration Safety Training and Emergency Response. And they do pretty much the same thing nationwide, teach school principals, administrators, staff, how to respond to active shooters. And what we're going to try to do today is put them out of business. Not that they don't do a great job, but if we can implement what we want to put together today, their training will be unnecessary. And that's what we're going to try to do with these fine people back here. Our first speaker today is going to be Stewart Rhodes. He's the founder and president of Oath Keepers. Oath Keepers was founded on April 19th of 2009 at Lexington, Concord, if I remember correctly, where the shot heard around the world was fired in, that was in 75, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, anyway, Stewart is our president nationally, and he came down today on his way to North Carolina, where Oath Keepers has issued a call to action to support the relief efforts on the hurricane that just came through North Carolina. So he'll be with us today, and tomorrow he's flying to North Carolina. Stewart is, I'll read this. Stewart, I guess it is signed to public speaking. Served in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper until disabled in a rough terrain parachuting accident during a night jump. He's a former firearms instructor, former member of Representative Ron Paul's DC staff, and was a volunteer firefighter in Montana. Stewart graduated from Yale Law School in 2004, where his paper, Solving the Puzzle of Enemy Combatant Status, won Yale's Miller Prize for the best paper on the Bill of Rights. He assisted teaching U.S. military history at Yale and was a Yale Research Scholar. Stewart currently writes for a number of magazines, and runs the Oath Keeper organization, and is helping us grow and bring people into the organization to support the Constitution. So without further ado, I give you Stewart Rhodes.
I'll try to keep this fairly brief. I appreciate everyone here putting this together. I think it's real important for communities to come together and start finding real solutions. And what really matters is the people on the ground, in the schools, in the communities, rather than in Washington, D.C. I think it's pretty obvious that most of the solutions are going to be local. Oath Keepers, when we saw the wave of active shooters in the schools and the tragedies that ensued, first thing we did is put together a panel of a dozen of our most experienced police officers and other emergency response personnel. In fact, two of them are back up there, Ron and Bob, Ron Thompson and Bob Houston. You guys need to wave. Of course, they're in the background up there. But they're two very experienced Arizona lawmen, career law enforcement their whole lives, as well as military veterans. And I believe both of them served as EMTs and emergency response as well. And then Mark Lytle here is also on our panel and helped out with the medical side. And we put together, or they put together, a pretty good, I consider a pretty good white paper on the recommendations for school safety. They spent about a month and a half working on it. And it's available on our website. I'll make sure it's up at the top of our website today for you to look at. And I've also got a hard copy here. We give them a hard copy to all the other panelists. Not that we have all the answers, but I think it's a pretty good wake-up call about what it takes. And what it takes, frankly, to keep our kids safe is a combined force effort of everyone in the community working together and putting together a layered defense system. And looking to other places in the world, the best place to look is Israel. They, of course, face terrorism since the birth of Israel. And some of the early terrorist attacks were on the schools because it's a soft target and it's traumatic to have children slaughtered. And they know that. So the Israelis, in response to that, did what we are now recommending they've done. Of course, they put in fences. You can't get into an Israeli school without going through a checkpoint. You got to get in there. It's like trying to get on a military base. And a lot of folks, of course, won't like that, but that's the reality. If you stop the guy at the perimeter before he gets to the front door, you're much more likely to be able to lock the school down and prevent him from getting inside in the first place. So looking at lessons learned from them, and also lessons learned from successful programs here in the United States, we put together I consider a pretty good panel of recommendations. So, layers, you know? It's like you guys in the military, you don't have just one perimeter. Your perimeter can't just be your hooch, your tent. It has to be further out. You've got pickets, you've got observers, you've got reconnaissance. You have layered defense systems. Same thing goes for a school. So I think fencing's good. I think barricades keep vehicles out are good, because a bad guy, if he got bulletproof glass, he's going to want to ram a truck through that. Whether he's a jihadist terrorist or a crazy person, they'll find a way. So nothing's foolproof, so we saw with TSA. But the more layers you put in place and the more resilience you have in your system, the more redundancy, the better chance you have of stopping the bad guys. So what do the Israelis do? They have physical barriers on the way into the school, making that guy have to go through 2 or 3 different access points before he can access the children. When he walks in the front door, he's in a box. Buzzing in, someone wants to visit the school, they get buzzed in, they come in that first door, they're now inside of a box of bullet-resistant glass. They can talk and identify themselves, and then they're buzzed through the second point. Now, if someone manages to sneak through both those systems, and he's a bad guy, and pulls a gun out and tries to kill the students, what happens to him? He gets shot. He gets shot, and not just by responding Israeli commandos or police officers. He's going to get shot by one of the teachers, because they do honor their teachers and train them. In Israel, it's compulsory military service, so most of them have been through that, or all have been through that, but they also get additional training after shooter response. In our country, we don't have compulsory military service, but we do have a large pool of military veterans and also police veterans. And so one of the recommendations we have, in fact, really, our entire program is based and centered on a program that already exists, and that's in Polk County, Florida, with Sheriff Judd. He's been running a program there for 2 years, very successfully, that incorporates the community and the school staff and teachers. And here's what he did. He put the word out that any teacher who wants to learn to carry a gun safely and effectively and go through training could do so. And he trains them to post-academy standards to be as well trained as a police officer in Florida. And then goes beyond that, above and beyond post standards for active shooter response. So even better training than the police are. And he said, any teacher that wants to do that, any school staff, any parent who has children in the school who wants to volunteer to go through the training can do that. And any military or police veterans in the community who want to come and likewise go through the training. But no one is going to be carrying a gun in the school unless they're properly trained. Okay? We added to that recommendations. Well, actually, he has the same. He has a mental background check requirement as well, and so we tossed that in with ours. So really, you look at this 2-year running program is successful on the ground, not theoretical, but practical. This is what's really been done in one county in Florida. And if the shooting that happened there in Florida had happened in one of his schools, I think it's a pretty good chance it would have been stopped a lot faster. And that's kind of the crux of the matter, is once the bad guy gets in, you want to try to keep him out. But once he's in, it's a race. It's a death clock that's ticking. The longer it takes, as Mark can tell you, the longer it takes to get emergency response personnel there, the more time that passes, the more people are going to die. From the shooter shooting them, and also from blood loss from being shot. So we would love to have a situation where the bad guy can't get in at all, but that's just not going to happen in reality. Things happen. Doors left unlocked. A student could be the one that does it, who has access, which is what happened in Florida, right? So I think it's imperative that schools across the country consider and accept the reality that they're going to have to do what the Israelis did. They're going to have to let the teachers and the staff and the parents and local veterans who are willing to go through the training, make sure they're trained up to speed, you have to let them carry around campus to stop the killing. Because when the attack happens, the very first thing that everyone does is call 911. And what are they calling 911 for? They want to get a good guy with a gun to the school as fast as possible. And they're praying as they hide under their desks, God, let them get here now. How long is it going to take? So the longer it takes, the more people will die. And the faster the response comes, the fewer will die. And the fastest response is if someone's already in the school who's competent and trained, including the teachers and the staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Stewart. Okay, you should have, I hope, in your packets, the piece entitled King County Oathkeepers Plan for School Safety. And I'm going to go over this because after we finish the speaking part of this program, we're going to break up and move into the lobby, and we're going to form teams at the table. And the idea is that your team will pick one or more of these 7 items and write up an action plan. What can your team do to make this happen so that we can make our schools safer? So let's start with number 1. Oath Keepers believes the current public policy to keep our children safe has failed, as evidenced by the increased number of school murders. For example, gun-free zones have made our children a target for those that would do them harm. I didn't have a chance to do it, but I have a picture of the signs that were up in Tombstone, which was the standard gun-free zone signs. And Tombstone elected to change that and arm their staff, and they now have signs that say our staff is armed and will do whatever is necessary to protect our children. and they haven't had any incidents up there that I know of. So this is something that we want to try to consider. It is a federal law, so it has to be done at that level to be removed. Number two, Oath Keepers believes the only way to protect our children is to apply what works. Those programs, procedures, and practices which kept our courthouses, federal buildings, airports, and airplanes secure and safe. If you go into any federal building, there'll be a metal detector and a guard at the front door. And they won't let you in if you buzz. So this is what we feel would be important for the schools. So that's something you would need to send up to Diane and the state superintendent of education, of instruction, and get her to fight with the legislature. But you send your own notes to the legislature. Oath Keepers believes it's simply a matter of common sense. If you have children or grandchildren in school, communicate this plan to the administrators where they attend. Please have your family members and friends with children and grandchildren contact the school administrators where they attend. Not everybody knows this. I didn't until I started studying this a little bit more carefully. The legislature of Arizona has authorized teachers to carry guns in schools. But it's up to the school administrators. And I hate to say this in front of a public employee, but what I found about public employees is their motto is, if I don't do anything, I can't do anything wrong. I can't get fired. So a lot of the administrators don't feel like it's a good idea to have people with guns in the school, but we think differently. Number four, Oath Keepers believes the use of proven techniques such as single entry points, positive identification, and metal detectors to keep bad people from entering our schools will protect our children. Schools would have one single entry point, but with multiple exits for emergency egress. And that's a pretty well proven method of keeping bad guys out while still giving the kids a chance to escape if necessary for a fire or something like that. Number five, Oath Keepers believes that armed guards should be placed in every school. These guards can be local police assigned to this duty, or school staff, faculty, or parents who are vetted and trained, as Stewart spoke of earlier. Again, this is an issue that needs to be brought up with the local school board and with our local police and sheriffs. And we want to thank Deputy Robinson for joining us today, protecting us from other people. Number six, Oath Keeper believes until the above personnel can be put in place, properly trained and vetted, veterans who have been vetted and especially trained for this duty should be used to fill in the gaps until they can be replaced with the above mentioned guards. So what we're saying is we've got a pool of veterans here. Today we saw some who are highly trained in firearms use and are good citizens. We would require that they get the Arizona concealed weapons permit, which requires training, or a DD-214 that says you have been trained. And we find that, I think we determined nationally that concealed carry holders, people who have actually gotten the permits, are among the safest people in the country. Sheila can talk about that. Okay, and finally we said, Oath Keeper believes each school district should hire or recruit one or more school safety specialists whose job would be to constantly monitor the effectiveness of the school safety program. Using these steps, Oath Keeper believes that the incidence of school mass murders can be stopped, and we strongly recommend government agencies and school boards nationwide to take these actions immediately to prevent any future loss of life. So that's what you're going to be doing at about noon. We're going to break up and go to the tables, and we'll work up the action plan. And again, the whole purpose of this is to get people in action. Write your school board, write your legislatures, go and visit your school board, go to the school board meetings, bring this up. Remember, we're talking about your children and your grandchildren, and you want to keep that in mind in what you're doing. And that's all I have, and I think, Diane, you're going to speak to us now?
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Diane Douglas. I have the honor and privilege of serving you as Arizona's Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I'll start just by sharing the reason it is such a privilege to me is because, in my opinion, there is no greater duty we have as a state than to educate our children. And it's not merely about making them worker bees and making them college applicants or college loan payers, as I sometimes say. But it's about making them successful citizens to protect, defend, and perpetuate our republic for future generations. And maybe in some of my closing I'll talk about how we're not doing that as well. But our students can't learn at school if they don't feel safe. And after the Parkland incident, I'll share with you, I announced more of a formal plan for school safety and what I think we should be doing to keep our kids safe. And not surprisingly, you've already heard some of it here today. The first part, obviously, is our facilities, and we need to make sure that we control who comes and who goes. And I'll tell you, I have a very long time history with this, because when my own daughter, who is now, she just turned 31, I don't know how that happened, but somehow she did. When she was in elementary school, and I started fighting the battle when she was in first grade because of the second grade room she was going to be, assigned to at the end of the year, I found out. So there were two buildings in our school. Well, there were a lot of buildings, but two in particular like this, and the fence went between the buildings here. Well, the classroom door was here, where it opened right onto the street. And I argued with the school for quite a long time. I think it took 5 years before they finally recognized that maybe we should put at least perimeter fencing around so all our classrooms are inside the class. The next piece of it, I think is very important, and obviously it's been touched on already, is SROs and armed security within our schools. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's Arizona Revised Statute 15341, which is the powers and duties of governing boards, say that they can give a school principal the authority to allow people and authorize them to carry on campus. Oh, did I get a bunch of pushback from the Arizona Republic and the Arizona School Boards Association and everybody about that? But that is the law in Arizona, and certainly, while I would never ask any teacher who does not feel safe and fully trained to do so, to carry any type of firearm on campus, I believe there are many who are ready, willing, and able to be trained. We were very fortunate here in Arizona. We won a grant and it's called Troops to Teachers. And what it helps is our former military transition from that service to another very honorable service, which would be teaching our children in our classrooms. Well, that can help with our teacher shortage, but that can also very much help with the security upon our campus and help train people like that. So I agree, concealed carry. I've had the privilege of traveling all across the state of Arizona during this term of office, and in many rural areas, I can't help but believe guns are probably the only place they're not or schools are the only place they're not carrying their guns within their community. So why would we not let them keep them safe? The next biggest issue we have to deal with, and it is a very challenging one. It seems every time we have a shooting incident, and praise God that we haven't had one here in Arizona, and I pray He always keeps our children safe, but every one that seems to happen, it comes out afterwards. Everybody seemed to know who that person was and the issues that they were struggling with and the problems that they were having. So how do we get our students to trust us, that they can come to us and talk to us? And how, as adults within that school, do we make sure we get our children the help they need, that it's not us, it's mental health professionals, obviously, that have to do this, but how do we get them the help that they need, but yet ensure that we still protect people's liberties, because this is still a free nation. So we have to make sure that we're doing it in a very thoughtful way. The governor did come out with some recommendations. They did not go through the legislature. Personally, I felt they had the potential to be a little bit too invasive of other people's, but I would recommend as the next legislative session comes forward to keep an eye on that and look at what may come forward. Just a couple of other things I'd like to mention to you. I had the privilege of going on a tour of St. Joseph's, I think they call it Dignity Health now, it will always be St. Joseph's to me, facility, and their foundation actually is working on a program, and it's called Stop the Bleed. And we will hopefully be able to partner with them a little bit. And it spoke to a little bit about what you said. A lot of the deaths that happen in a school shooting are not immediate. It's because the people bleed out. So their goal is to get resources to schools to make sure they have what they need on their campuses to help them. We mentioned already gun-free school zones. I had a note on that. That was from 1990. Joseph Biden, and I was looking up some information to talk about that just a little bit, and it amazed me as I looked at it how quickly it went through. It was dropped, it went through the Senate, it went through the House all on the same day, and then was signed within about a month by the president. But to me it's an example of good intentions gone bad, because that's just not the way we're seeing now is the right way to keep our schools safe. You know, when I went through, and I still hear it to this day, as I went through the battle with my daughter's school district to get that perimeter fencing around her school, what I heard then and what I still hear now, every time I talk to administrators about it, no disrespect to administrators or any teachers who may be in the audience, is that, well, we don't want our schools to look like prisons. We don't want them to look, and I said, I'm not saying put up 12-foot of chain link with barbed wire around the top. I'm talking about controlling an entrance and an exit into the school. But the reality is, we have armed guards at our banks to keep our money safe. And yet we don't take the same precautions with the most precious thing that we have in our lives, which is our children and our grandchildren. So with that, I think I will stop here, and I know we'll have a lot more conversation. I'd love to give a shout out to Tombstone. I saw what they've done. I think that's the appropriate thing to be doing. And again, we must protect our children. It is more than our duty as citizens. It is what God calls upon us to do. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to more conversation.
Our next speaker is Colonel Jon Gold, and he's going to talk to us today. John's a retired Army girl. Go Army.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, my name is Jon Gold, and I am a retired Army colonel. Before I was a colonel, I was a private. And I worked my way up through the ranks and went to officer candidate school and then became a colonel. I know both sides of the fence. I spent 30 years in the intelligence service, and I'm a certified counterterrorism instructor. So I have a little bit of background about protection, but let me tell you some stories first, if I may. Last week I went to a county board of supervisors meeting. When I walked in, there was a line with a metal detector and armed guards. And they had me take my pocket credit card tool out, and they stored it to protect the county supervisors who were up on the podium. And I thought that was real nice. They gave it back to me at the end. Didn't think much of it. I visited 2 high schools recently. I walked in, there was absolutely no security. And I had a gun in my pocket both times. And the sign said, gun-free zone. Well, I remember the last gun-free zone sign that I looked at. It was that fellow who dressed up like Batman's enemy. passed 2 movie theaters that didn't have signs that did gun-free zones, went to one that did have the sign, and murdered a whole bunch of people. So much for signs protecting people. And then I went to a government school, just to visit it. It was Job Corps, never knew it existed. It's in Tucson. I walked in, and I saw a metal detector, and a young lady standing there and said, "You have to go through this if you're visiting." I said, "Well, then I better take my firearm out of my pocket and leave it in my car." She said, "Oh, that would be a good idea." The point is, she was not protected, and she was not armed. And I took a look at the value structure we have. We value our elected leaders at the local level more than we value our own children. We value our jewelry stores more than we value our own children. We value our banks more than we value our own children. We value our airports more than we value our own children. And there's something wrong with that picture. So let me tell you another story. Many years ago, my wife and I were visiting Israel. We happened to be in a jewelry store. And there was a bang. And my wife says, "What was that?" And the store owner said, "Oh, it was probably just a sonic boom." I said to my wife, "No, that was a hand grenade. I can tell the difference. It came from the left, let's head out to the right." We walk out the door, and my wife runs to the left. I catch up with her, and I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I want to see what's happening." At which time, we were stopped by Israeli security. We saw a fellow lying on the ground, obviously bomb blast. I said, "What happened?" He said, "It was just an incident." Then I identified myself, showed him my identification. He says, the fellow out there pulled out a hand grenade. He was going to go into the market, and the snipers on the roof shot him before he could get in." Did you know that? They had snipers on the roof. Why? Because they were doing a little more than being victims. They were anticipating what the threat could be, because this is something they experienced. A little more about the Israeli system. Protection. They have one entrance to their schools that is always guarded. They have additional entrances that, when they are opened, are guarded, and they have what is called barrier protection. And they add something called protection in depth. What does protection in depth mean? Well, for those of you who served in the military, you know that a minefield simply stalls the bad guys. A wall simply stalls the bad guys. Any one deterrent that you put up will simply stall the bad guys. But stalling the bad guys gives you an advantage. It gives you time to react. So barriers are good. The president's idea of a barrier is good. It gives you time to react. But what about protection in depth? Well, let's take a look at the Israeli system. We get out of our hotel in Egypt. We head for the El Al Airlines. Before we can board the plane, our suitcases are with us, and a fellow was sitting at a desk. And he addressed me by name and military rank. At the time, I wasn't a colonel, I think I was a major. And he says, "Major Gold, did you ever lose sight of your luggage?" Now, that told me several things about him. Number one, he knew I was coming there. Number two, he was concerned about my luggage, not me. And I said, "No, I never lost sight of my luggage." He says, "When you left the hotel and you went down the elevator, was your luggage in your elevator?" Guy's smart. He's not minimum wage. I said, "No, you're right, sir. When we left the hotel, the luggage went down the service elevator. And they gave it back to us when we got into our taxi to get here." He says, "In that case, you did lose sight of your luggage. Would you mind opening your luggage and looking to see if there's anything in there that you did not put in. Now that's what I call security. Very different from what we do in this country, and that's at airports. But what about schools? Do you want, quote unquote, your guards to be minimum wage? Or do you want your guards to be somebody who can say, that doesn't look right? Let me see what's under that baggy coat. Let me see what's in that knapsack, because something doesn't look right. So the idea of saying, who should we assign as guards is important. Returning veterans, they are trained to look for danger. Train them to be school guards. Give them a position that values. They will not be minimum wage earners. Make it a profession, because the times we live in are different from the times we grew up in. The threats are different. ISIS may be on the run, but Al-Qaeda is growing. And their mission is spectacular attacks, multiple and coordinated. Could you imagine 50 different school attacks in 50 different states happening at the same time? How would that affect us? Well, that's something we know would be something they would plan. Hit us where we're most vulnerable. So let's go back to the Israeli system. Every school that has at least 100 students must have a visible guard. And that's for public disclosure, because an armed guard is a deterrent. What is not for public disclosure is that for every multiple of 100 students, you have additional guards. Why is that not public? Was that telling me I should stop?
It wasn't. I'm sorry, I hate the anti-gay.
That's okay. My phone once went off during the opera. What opera was that? Phantom of the Opera in Manhattan, and my wife wouldn't speak to me for hours. So no offense taken. Where was I?
Going back to these multiple guards.
Not only multiple guards, but the psychological knowledge that in addition to the guards per 100 people, you also have individuals armed with concealed weapons in the school. Now, why is that important? If a teacher has a pistol, let's say a small pistol, 22 caliber, 380 caliber, and the fellow walks in with a shotgun, or an AR-15 or an AK-47, that pistol does not stand a chance of defeating that terrorist with a rifle. But you know what that pistol does? That pistol gives the students an extra 45 seconds of safety before help arrives. 2 teachers would get another 45 seconds. 3 teachers, another 45 seconds. And we've learned that most of these school shooters, when confronted with anyone else with a gun, turns the gun on themselves. And that would be for the typical malcontent, a maladjusted, a psychologically deficient student, but it wouldn't stop a determined terrorist or group of terrorists. So your barriers have to be sufficient. And what happens further in depth? The problem we face in this country is that the majority of people have the deer in the headlights reaction. Oh my God, there's a shooter, and they freeze. That's not what the Israelis do. We have fire drills. Somebody rings a fire drill, everybody gets organized, they know exactly what to do, they get in the line, they go to the designated exit, and they stay in a secure area so that head counts can be taken. When I was growing up, we used to have, and you may remember this, some of you who are close to my age, we had atomic bomb drills, where you would crawl under your desk and kiss you behind you by, because there was not much you could do about it. But think about this. Staying in the state of alertness training in a state of alertness, training teachers how to react in an active shooter threat, training students how to react in an active shooter threat. What do you train them to do? Well, for God's sakes, barricade the doors. Or what happens if the shooter gets in? What do you do? Stand there and die in place? Or sit on the floor and die in place and get executed individually? Or do what they teach in Israel. Attack the shooter. Attack the shooter. If you train in a certain fashion, you will react in a certain fashion. And simply saying, no, I'm perfectly happy putting a sign up that says gun-free zone. You're living in a world that is not the real world we live in today. If you say it won't happen, what do you do when it does happen? There's a lot of stuff that we can do that this meeting is about and that you've discussed, and you'll hear other people discussing it as well. The last thing we have to consider is the enemy evolves. They would love to take down aircraft, but our defenses have evolved as well. And they have to continuously evolve. For instance, monitoring. How long can you look at a video camera? The Israelis determined 4 hours is overkill. You cannot have anybody monitor a camera for 4 hours. You got to switch it before. You got to use intelligence. You got to use psychological operations. You have to use defensive things. But most of all, you have to be aware that a threat is real. And to defeat the threat is critical. Because when it occurs, if it occurs to someone else's kid, I used to joke and say, if the Soviets fire nuclear weapons at Davis Mountain Air Force Base, that's exactly where I want to be, because they won't hit what they're aiming at. They never would. However, if a shooter comes into this country, you figure, well, he's going to target Los Angeles. He's going to target New York. He's going to target Chicago. He's going to target Washington. My kids, my grandkids, they don't go to school there. So we'll learn a lesson and be prepared next time. You don't think the bad guys would think about that? And pick a soft target? Think about it. What's going on today, what this meeting is all about, is critical. The tragedy is all those seats aren't filled. Thank you, Ph.D.
Our next speaker is going to be Bob Fox. He's a retired sheriff department lieutenant.
Good morning. 27 years in law enforcement, and at the beginning I got a degree in computer science. I did not know what I was getting myself into. I never saw a police sheriff's car after that. I got put in automation. I developed systems for criminal gang tracking, tracking pedophiles, sex registrants, crimes against senior citizens, narcotics, homicide, and various other things. And I only developed it for one agency, and the next thing I know, it grew nationwide. And that's my background. I have an important statement to tell you. Our young people and others knew about what would happen in the future with school violence. They knew the individuals, they suspected them, they talked about them, they social media messaged about them, and they kept up the pressure with each other on the knowledge of what these individuals could do. So the young people knew, and they know it now. But we can't access it because our society and our Constitution says You call the police when you see something happening, even if you suspect something different. 94% of our teens use social media. So those kids that you see walking around every day, every hour, they run into poles, they fall off sidewalks, they crash into other people because they're using social media. Now think outside the box for a moment, please. What if we could have access to some of that? They don't name names necessarily, they use nicknames. They don't name locations, they use other names. Their code is very foreign to us. If you ever saw a kid actively use social media, you would not know what they're speaking of. They know, and it evolves and changes constantly. One study said that teens use social media almost 9 hours per every single day. That's why you see them banging the keyboard on their phones, constantly, non-stop in some cases. 2.46 billion with a B use social media, people overall, use social media in 2017. They text and they tweet about potential dangers everywhere and anywhere. I asked several young people, why did they do not call 911 sooner? And these are the most common answers. I want to be anonymous. I don't snitch on friends. There was no immediate danger. I don't want to be contacted. It's none of my business. And yet they will tweet and send social media nonstop to others about these dangerous potential situations. Let's change this dynamic. Let's think out of the box. What if we could create a national nonprofit organization that uses social media with easy access through various social media organizations and companies that provide interface through their telephones? And we would essentially gather up text from them to us, not intercept, not secretly, but asking them to cooperate with us when they see something of danger. Start an organization that runs 24/7, does analysis constantly by computer, and the computer alerts us when there's activity. And by the way, every message you send, whether you realize it or not, whether you want it or not, has what's called an IP address. We know the generic area, and sometimes we know down to the device, but rarely, more often, we know the generic area of where that message is coming from. With these kids sending billions of messages per day, how much intelligence is there in that? Billions. And if we ask them to cooperate, not intercept them, can we gather information from that? Can something good come of that? How would we run this type of an organization? We would have boards of directors, which are retired and active people, professionals. Board of directors, attorneys, young people, law enforcement, physicians, psychologists, teachers, first responders, programmer analysts, and statisticians. All volunteers to start this organization up. Collect and gather, 100% anonymous, statistical analysis, 24 hours, 7 days a week. People all working from home, not an office, not a multi-million, billion-dollar organization that we hope works and never ends and increases our tax liabilities. What is the potential impacts? Is this only for school violence? No. All kinds of crime. Our young people are smart. Our young people are intuitive. Our young people know more of what's going on than we do. And where do they put it? On the keyboard. Constant, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week communication. The impact is potentially huge. Terrorism, suicides, bullying. Bullying causes suicides. mental crisis, psychological assistance, internet crime, all kinds of internet crime. And law enforcement cannot be contacted, or is not contacted initially, because they have been contacted in the past. And what happened? They don't respond, because nothing happened yet. They wait to be reactive rather than proactive. Out of necessity, we must follow the Constitution. So, law enforcement is not the immediate answer for gathering up this type of information. And remember, I represent law enforcement. I came from law enforcement, and my career was spent in law enforcement. So I ask you to think out the box and think of the potential service something like this can do for our country. And the young people, they do want to share, as long as it's anonymous. So as part of the plan for this non-existent organization, what we would do would be to ask them if they wish to not be anonymous. If they wish to make a statement, then we, based on the criteria that the board of directors sets up, will set the bar as to when we contact law enforcement. And, key point here, we never contact just one agency, because one agency forgets, ignore, does not consider a crisis, does not consider a problem, and nothing happens. But if we contact 2 or 3 agencies at the city, county, state, and federal law enforcement, then they know that someone's tracking. They know that they've been informed. And what could we do? Would it be worthwhile creating something like this to save one life a year? I say yes. Could we help our country? Could we help our, where's that bell? Oh. I got the 1 minute signal. Can we help our students? Can we help school safety? Can we help narcotics distribution? Can we help suppress cartels and organized crime and non-organized crime? Can we do something about possibly finding suspects or groups of suspects? Yes. So keep your eye on this. I do have a contact at the end of the page, and make sure that all of you have the page. It starts with our young people and others new. They know, we want to know, but we must follow our Constitution, we must follow the laws of the land. So we follow what's called CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, on doing all this. But remember, there are essentially no names unless they volunteer. We do not intercept. They voluntarily bring that information to us, and they share it, and it doesn't put them in a risky situation, and doesn't expose them as we would never expose any of them. Think about it. We'll see some more of it in the future. I've already developed several national data tracking networks that you know and have heard of, and you hear about them daily. And I encourage you to attend meetings like this for the good people that are behind you here who want to do something about school safety. It isn't our last priority. It is our first priority if you have children and if you have grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Our next speaker is Sheila Brantley with the NRA School Shield Program.
Thank you all so much for inviting NRA School Shield to be a part of this important conversation. I want to commend you all and the folks who organized this conversation today here, because it really does take communities to make our schools more secure. I want to start by asking, how many of you in the audience today have a child or a grandchild or nieces and nephews in our schools today? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you have loved ones, or maybe you yourself are first responders, and if something bad were to happen in our schools, you or your loved ones would be responding to our schools? Okay, do we have anybody that doesn't have hands up yet? I'm going to say, how many of you were products of our schools? You've graduated from schools, right? We've all been touched by our schools. And so one thing that's frustrating to me is when folks say, well, why are we trying to prioritize school security? They're neglecting to recognize that our schools are the centers of our communities. They're not only raising our future leaders of tomorrow, but they're also places where we go for entertainment with theater. They're places where we have sporting events. We go to football games on Friday nights. There are places where we have our polling and elections in most cases. Did you know 1 in 6 Americans steps foot in our schools on a day-to-day basis? That's one of the data points that I read. That's a heck of a lot of people. Did you know that our schools are responsible for about 55 million children? There's about 56 million now in the fall of 18 for the school year. So it's a tremendous amount of folks that are depending on us to prioritize their safety and security so they can focus on learning. Today I want to talk to you about the NRA's resources and our commitment to making our schools more secure. In December of 2012, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, the NRA and its members and its supporters stepped forward and said, this is not okay. And if there's anything that we can do to help make our schools more secure, we want a seat at the table. From there, we had asked a task force that was led by Asa Hutchinson, and he led this independent task force, and they went out and they took a temperature of what was going on in the schools at that point in time. Because it's very difficult to talk about how to make our schools more secure when you don't have a baseline measurement of what the exact situation our schools are in at that time. And in April of 2013, they released a report, and it had recommendations and best practices that they outlined, and said, surely, our schools can and should be more secure. And there are very common vulnerabilities that we see now, that we've seen for years, and we're still seeing today, that we could be doing a better job at. So with that report, what the NRA did is we put together a program, and we said, all right, well, the first thing that we need to do is help folks understand how to organize their collective thoughts and measure their schools. And that's really the heart of a vulnerability assessment. We started putting this program together. We worked with the experts that were part of that task force, and we said, if we wanted to put a training program together and help folks have access to this resource, how would we go about doing that? We worked with them for many, many months, multidisciplinary experts coming together and helping us formulate what has become our security assessor training. And we actually have a handout out there for you all to be able to look at. And what this is it's helping folks go and do these security assessments of the schools. Because if you want to talk about how to organize your resources and learn how to make the school more secure, you need to know what you're already doing and keep doing what you're doing well, but then address those gaps in the security plans. And we've heard today you want to have multiple redundant layers of protection. So it's giving an organization and tools for the toolbox to be able to say, all right, if we did have a threat, how early could we detect that threat? How long could we delay that threat to allow for an appropriate response? And so this training program is completely free. We work very hand in hand with the local school community as well as the local law enforcement agencies. And this training first started in Tennessee in 2015. We moved to 5 trainings in 2016. We expanded to Pennsylvania, Idaho, and South Dakota. In 2017, we hosted almost a dozen trainings, and this year we'll be hosting 14 trainings. And Arizona is actually hosting a training next month. So please talk to me today if you'd like more information about that. But the next thing is really helping folks to engage and start this conversation. And you all being here today are a testament to wanting to speak up, to want to get your communities talking. And so we have another handout that I've brought, and we spoke with a lot of different folks, and it has questions on the back. And it's talking about, have we ever done a vulnerability assessment? Because how could we talk about what we need to improve upon if we don't even know what we have in place right now? What is our security posture? Do we have armed personnel, or do we have school resource officers? Do we know when the last time our emergency operations plan was reviewed? Do we practice it? Do we even have a plan? And these are really important questions to start digging into, really understanding what it is that your community is doing right now to protect our children, and then a step forward to use the resources that we have. So I know that's a very quick overview of our program and our resources, but I really welcome the chance to speak with all of you about how we can work together to make our schools more secure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheila, and our next speaker is Dr. Eric Dietz with Purdue University.
suggested. I'm a little more height challenged than the other speakers. I teach at Purdue and been at Purdue for about 15 years. I spent 22 years in the Army before joining Purdue, so I've got a couple years of professional life that sort of have guided what I'm doing today. Basically, the Army, I was a 200-pound translation box between the war fighter and the techies. The Army saw fit to send me to grad school after I went to jump school. After I was a platoon leader, I got a Ph.D. And basically the idea was I would go out and try to help the war fighter better understand technology and what we needed to win on the battlefield and what science and technology might be able to help our war fighters. After joining Purdue to do Homeland Security work, frankly, I joined Purdue because I took my oldest daughter on a campus visit and looked at old friends, and one thing led to another that led to a job offer at Purdue, so I was the ultimate helicopter parent. I got to follow my daughter to school, and to my daughter's horror, I took the job. I have 3 girls that have gone through the system. All are Purdue graduates now, all have moved through, but my research at Purdue really has been guiding graduate students and upperclassmen in how do we think about policy and how do we develop policy specifically for security. And one of the classes I teach, we actually teach modeling software. The modeling software is a commercial product. It's used by a number of our logistics industries, and I've repurposed it to do security work. With the blessing of the company that does the software, they're happy with this. Right after the Sandy Hook shooting, I had one of my classes starting, and I actually challenged one of the student groups to look at the active shooter events and to try to go back towards things that we do probably more commonly recognize on college campuses. We've got college campuses all over the country playing sporting events this weekend, just like we'll have pro sports tomorrow. We'll have a number of sporting events that are out there, and there's one common thing to all these sporting events. They measure what they're doing. There's a scoreboard up there. Every time one of us played, every time one of us went and saw our kids at a sporting event, that scoreboard was up there. And how do we think about that scoreboard in terms of security? We didn't have a measurement method, like a yardstick. We probably have, I might be here today developing and working in this modeling class to look at the school shootings and try to determine which is better in relative value. The school resource officer, arming teachers in small percentages, putting locks on the doors, or simply waiting for the police. It was mentioned before, average police response time in this country is 10 minutes. According to the FBI's report on active shooting from 2000 to 2013, there were just over 60 active shooters. All but 2 of them happened in gun-free zones. Not all schools, but all gun-free zones. So there's a common thread. Gun-free zones seems to be a problem. One of the other common threads that we saw that my students, after they studied this problem, is an active shooter event, maybe counter to our intuition, counter to mine, was an active shooter shoots and causes 1 casualty about every 20 seconds, 3 a minute. So you start doing the math. We don't need a lot of advanced math to try to say, okay, 3 a minute times 10 minutes to wait for the police to get there, that's a pretty devastating outcome. And that's what we ask our students to try to start looking at. How do we counter that devastating outcome? And they looked at it by building a school environment in the model. They looked at the time constraints of the police, the school resource officer, abilities to get to a shooting, and we looked at the teachers and arming the teachers. The assumptions we used for arming the teachers were very conservative. We assumed that if there was an active shooter in the building would go under a lockdown or some sort of shelter-in-place strategy, and the teachers would, and whatever room we were in, teachers and students, they would stay where they're at. So this basically leads us to, if we have a truly gun-free zone and no firearms in the schools, the teachers are forced to tell the children, like we've seen in some videos of preparation for active shooter, here's a line that we can see from the door. Sometimes the schools, and Purdue does this too, we have little windows with the doors in the hallway. So the windows have an arc that you can see inside the classroom, and we have some blind spots. So sometimes there's a line on the floor of some schools, so we get behind the blind spots. And the question was, what do we want our teachers to have? Do we want them to tell the kids, stand behind me, I'll try to protect you? with the firearm, or do we want to say, let me stand in front and get shot first? So our model is able to run in this environment to be able to look at these strategies that we might put in place, or the policies we might put in place to counter an active shooter. And what our results were able to show, and again, since it's a modeling environment, we don't have to take a very small number of active shooter events that have happened historically. We can run the same events again and again using parameters and using behaviors that have been distributed and shown by previous active shooters. So we can run the models hundreds of times. So after running the models for hundreds of times, looking at what's the value of a resource officer, what's the value of concealed carry at 5 and 10%? Again, the teachers shelter in place with the students and engage the shooter that comes in a classroom. They don't act as surrogates to police. And we did that first to try to make sure that we simplified some of the training, but also so that way we simplify the task for law enforcement who's coming into a school with a school shooting and looking for somebody with a firearm. And so that was, again, one of the assumptions we made when we built this. We were able to show that the single greatest effect that we could have on trying to counter school shootings and trying to reduce casualties is the introduction of that school resource officer. But we did it, and were able to show that you could reduce casualties by 70 to 80%. Additionally, if you add in the concealed carry, even at 5 or 10% concealed carry, and the conservative assumptions I mentioned, we could save 5 to 20% of casualties. Again, it's random. I mean, it takes hundreds of times to run. You run it once, and the shooter goes into the room with the teacher with the firearm, and there's an equal capacity to bring the gun to bear. We assume that the event terminated there, but it could just as easily be another room that they started in first. So that's where the averaging comes from. Just simply putting a locked door can slow up the shooter. Some of the other speakers mentioned that. Other barriers we put in place. And by adding all those together, we were able to show that you could save 85 to 90% of the casualties, based, again, depending on the assumptions, on that police response time of 10 minutes. All these are policy decisions that we have at our disposal. Should we arm teachers? Should we put a school resource officer in the school? And if our community police response time is slow, some of our large cities, the police response time can be very, very good. Some, it might be very poor in some of the police departments that have been deprived of resources. We have lots of places in rural America where they would dream of a 10-minute response time. That's why many of us have firearms, like I'm sure you all. You've got response times in some cases that might be well above 10 minutes. And I think that's one of the things as we start to think about these firearms policies and the scorecard that we need to keep to maintain sensible countermeasures or mitigation for an active shooter. We need to be thinking about what our community is. The same policy that may work in Manhattan may not work in Western Kansas or Alaska. And we need to realize that. And that's how we constructed our modeling work. We're currently looking at other things with the same modeling approach. We're looking at run, hide, fight, which has commonly been told to us that is the universal response to an active shooter. Run, hide, fight was invented by the Houston Police Department as part of a FEMA grant in 2012. Now, it's not a bad idea. It seems like a good idea. If somebody's got a firearm and they're shooting, the first thing I'm going to do is get out of harm's way. It's like in the Army, we didn't need to be taught too many times to duck when somebody started shooting, right? But the idea of getting away from that incident is not a terrible idea. We were able to look at other things with the modeling as well. We frequently find these active shooter events, and anecdotally information comes out. And the victims tell us nobody called 911. Nobody called the public safety access point, and began the 10-minute trek for the police on average to get to us. So we're able to actually look at value of a number of technologies with our modeling approach, from arming the teachers, bringing the school resource officer in, adding film and other barriers to the doors, or adding sensors like gunshot sensors in the schools that actually automatically call the police. By looking at all those, we can start to do a better job on developing policy, and policy that's one that's affordable for our communities and within our budgets of our communities. Because as Superintendent had of public instruction mentioned, we do have finite budgets. I think all of us feel like we've been sometimes taxed enough, and we need to make sure that our elected officials are doing a good job with the budgets we give them and trying to make as good a job as possible for protecting our students in the process. So some of the things that we do at Purdue every day, I've got some of these papers published. It was good enough by one of our planners here to actually brought a copy of the paper. I didn't today, but I've got cards if anybody would like to see some of these results. Trust me, they're not too pointy-headed. That's not the kind of work I do. I don't do the pointy-headed work. I do it so that the infantry guys could understand that, this is what we need to do here, and that's where I started out in my Army career, frankly. So I'd be delighted to talk to you better later today, and thank you so much for organizing this and inviting me here.
Stand up, stick it to us. That's all we use, Zach. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Dietz. Our next speaker is Zack Taylor with the National Association of Former Border Patrol Agents. Awesome. Okay. Officers.
I'm going to talk to you about intelligence, and I have a confession to make. My IQ is below 188. If you are engaged in critical thinking and have common sense, you will realize that Paul in his wisdom saved the best for last. The school security problem we're having is a symptom of a larger problem. And that is that there are certain people in this country that are engaged in asymmetrical warfare against the United States. You can see it on TV every day and every night, if you're silly enough to watch that thing. Bill Clinton gave us the cue or the clue to understand government. It's whatever your definition of is. And in that are two things that you need to be able to recognize, and that's misinformation and disinformation. And both of them can be called fake news. I'm going to demonstrate something to you. Does anyone not know what that is? That's right. I was a particular student of and predicted the outcome of the Parkland shooting. Everybody looked at the Parkland shooting, and what did they come up with? What was the culprit?
Gun.
It was the gun, right? Rick Scott, the governor of the state of Florida, was quick to demonize the gun and say, oh, if we have someone that's a problem, we're going to take the gun away. Well, if you take the problem person's gun away, you only took his gun away. The problem is still in the community, and that is the person. That gun will sit right there, and it will harm no one until someone picks it up. And it's the someone that is not being addressed. And one of the things that I do is I go to Congress and try and talk to them. And it's hard to get them to listen until they call you and say, we want to hear from you. Well, you already know that the language of politics is emotion. Okay? So it's an emotional subject that impacts directly on them that they want to talk about. And they already have an outcome in mind. or nobody seems to have an answer. Most of the problems that we have in America today that are going to be huge problems to us in the future are directly related to immigration. Refugee resettlement, unaccompanied minors, refugees, asylum, all these people that should not be here, but by governmental policy are. People that want to exploit our immigration system do it for the exchange of money and power. That is what drives the political scene in the United States. The exchange of money for power, power and influence for money. It's exactly what got Lavoy Finicum killed. It's exactly what got Seth Rich killed. Why do we not have a final report on the Las Vegas shooting? Because nothing they're telling us adds up. They say there was one shooter and one set of guns, but yet they're taking different kind of bullets out of the people that were shot. But they're not telling you that. They're not telling you that the doctor that worked on Seth Rich said he had non-life-threatening injuries, but yet he was dead the next day. And then we hear yesterday that the Director of National Security, Clapper, and the head of the CIA, Brennan, blackmailed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, to get him to vote a certain way on Obamacare. So folks, the greatest threat we have, the greatest problem we have in directly addressing our school security problems lies exactly with the people we're appealing to correct them. I'll bet you $1, and I haven't talked to Diane Douglas about this, but I bet you one of the greatest impediments to her in getting what needs to be done in the schools in Arizona is the State Board of Education. And probably the governor of the state of Arizona. Because they're ruled by politics, and people like Diane Douglas are looking at outcomes. If you, as parents and grandparents, aren't directly involved in the schools that your children and grandchildren go to, all you know is what somebody else tells you. I don't know about you, but the toughest job I ever had was being a parent. I did not understand my parents until I had children. And after I left home at the age of 17, went away to college and work and everything else, I was surprised at how much my parents had learned in 3 years. It is wonderful what life experiences will do for you. The most important one my grandfather told me when I was a little kid, he said, "Son, do you know how to tell an honest man when you see one?" I said, "No, I hadn't thought about that, Grandpa." He says, "Well, look at their hands. If there's hair growing in the palm of their hands, they're an honest man." And what he was telling me is everybody has that weakness. The weakness that we have is the security of our children. Are we willing to give up freedom for security? Or are we willing to do what's necessary to stop the person who, if they get a gun in their possession, is a danger? Or are we going to focus on the inanimate object, the gun? It is an emotional situation, because when you see 23 children hauled away right in TV in front of you in real time, you have an emotional reaction to it. And if you've ever been there and actually helped do it, you never forget it. The problem is that the is part of what is reality that we get from television and radio and social media is manipulated. Learn to look for the intelligence markers. Who's involved? Who's paying for what? The most money coming into the political campaigns right now in Arizona are coming from George Soros. He's not a friend. If you look at the Red for Ed movement that took place, that was political, 100%. They wanted 20% raise for the teachers. Well, anybody that knows anything about education in Arizona know that the school boards are the ones that pay the teachers. So the money goes to the school boards and they decide how to distribute it. So what happens? 20% goes to the school board, but only 3% goes to the teachers. What did they accomplish? They accomplished the political goal of organizing people around hashtag Red for Ed to move other political programs forward. The same thing is happening with security in the schools. People make money off of crises and disaster. They pay money to solve and put salve on their emotions. And they don't want to deal with the larger issue, just like what's going on with Rosenstein, Mueller, and all these other people that are true enemies of the state. The situation is so serious that the American people can't comprehend it because in their hearts they're good people because they were raised in church. They were raised to respect the flag and to say the Pledge of Allegiance. They weren't attacking it. There's something special about being American. And what is happening, especially in our schools, is to dilute the influence of America to make more Americans. Until it is diluted, that influence diluted to the point we cease to be Americans. Immigration is how they're doing it. The Soviets revealed this in the 1950s, that was their plan. And yet today, it is not general knowledge. I'll be around. We have a website. We don't talk too much about this and who we talk to. That's one of the reasons I talk to U.S. senators, congressmen, sitting presidents, is because I don't talk about who I talk to. But what I'm talking to you about is what I'm telling them. So I'm telling you, they know. And I told you, he saved the best for last.
Thank you, Zack. And he's right. Diane Douglas is coming up next. But did wear a suit, and that's pretty impressive. Okay, well that's the panel and their ideas, and then what we're going to do is close up with Diane Douglas to give you a little bit more insight into education, I guess, in Arizona. So if you would.
So if I'm going now, does that mean I'm really the last? And the best for the last?
He just reconsidered.
I guess I kind of been taking some notes as I've been going along, and I'll think about if anybody reads Thomas Sowell out there, you know he does articles that he calls Random Thoughts from a Passing Scene. And I think that's how I'll end this, just some of the things that we're doing in the department, some of the things I've heard here, a little bit more that we can share. One of the issues that we will definitely face as we talk about keeping our children safe is the pushback from the community. We've heard, everything I've heard here is exactly what I know and what I see our children and our teachers and our communities living, and the threats are very real. And again, thank God we haven't had one here in Arizona, and I pray we never will. But one of the things I took away from the Parkland tragedy earlier this year is look at the students after it occurred. Look at the rights that they were willing to give away, that they don't even seem to realize that they have. And they don't realize they have them because we're not teaching them to them. And that's shame on us. When I was on the Peoria School Board, I ran for that board because of certain things that were happening in our community that I saw and I didn't like. And I encourage all of you, go to your school board meetings, be there, speak to them. You get usually called to the public 3 minutes or so to share whatever the issue may be. But if you don't like what you see your school board then step up and run for it, or find someone to run for it, to make sure their job is not to represent the school district. That's what the Arizona School Board Association teaches school board members, but it's not. It's to represent you, the community members. And one of the issues that I ran on when I initially ran for the school board was we had open campuses for our high schools for lunch and other times that kids could come and go as they please. We had numerous tragedies, sadly, within the community of students. One young lady right around the corner, half a mile from where I lived, was killed in a lunchtime car accident. There were others where the students might have caused an accident and community members were killed. This is a tragedy. And that was one of my key issues that I brought to the board that I wanted to fight to change. And you cannot begin to imagine how much pushback there was from the community. This is crazy. Why would we want to do this? Our kids need the freedom. They need to be able to come and go as they please. And it wasn't just a threat to the community at lunchtime, but it was also how open the campuses are. When I came on the school board, our kids didn't even wear ID badges when they were at school. And that's crazy, we don't need to do that. And I said, well, first of all, every one of our employees do. Why wouldn't our children, so we know who's coming and going and who belongs on this campus? It wasn't until actually a teacher's purse was stolen at one campus by a young, I don't remember whether it was a young man or young woman, to tell you the truth, but they looked like they could have been a student even though they were 20-something, and were able to just walk on the campus. And thankfully that was a very successful endeavor. It took some more school board members being elected, but eventually we were able to close our campuses and keep the kids safe. But those are the type of things that can impact our schools. And if we're not controlling who's coming and going, I made a note here, we recently had that terrorist cell in New Mexico that was shut down. And their intent was to go on school campuses and shoot and kill our children. An interesting thing I'd like to share with you for just a moment, and this is actually, I had the privilege of being up in Lake Havasu City at the end of August, and they opened a program up there, and it's called Rachel's Challenge. And if you're not familiar with the program, it came from the Columbine shooting. There was a young lady, Rachel Joy Scott, and she was the first victim at Columbine. And she was killed actually outside the school building as the perpetrators came on campus. And they were students there, so they knew the kids, and they knew her. She was a very, very inspirational young lady. And they came up to her and asked her if she believed in God, and she said yes, she did. And she was told to repudiate God, and she said, no, I won't. And she was shot and killed for that. But after she was killed, her parents found she was an avid journal keeper. Somehow she knew that she was going to die very young. She wrote very frequently about it. After she was killed, they found on a mirror in her room, on the back of it, she had drawn her handprint and dated it when she was 13 years old. She was killed when she was 17 years old. But she wrote on it, "This hand will touch millions someday." And now her father's created Rachel's Challenge, and one of the issues with this program is to go in and help schools and districts, like Havasu has adopted this as a district-wide program in their unified K-12, for all of their schools to help deal with some of the emotional challenges, the bullying that goes on in school, help build those very, very positive relationships that our children need, and help them work with the staff and the community to come together. When they kicked this off at the end of August, they did it at school-wide events. That night, they set up chairs for 1,100 community members, parents, grandparents, citizens, to come in and see this program. And it was standing room only. They estimated there were 1,200 to 1,300 people there. And those are the types of things we need to do. We need to be involved and not say, oh, it's the school's problem, or it's the principal's problem, or the school board's problem. It's for all of us. And I will say Rachel's challenge was one of the most impressive. I've been involved in Arizona education for probably 25 years now, seeing lots of character programs come and go through our schools, and this is the most impressive one I've ever seen. What we do at the department, we have a school safety department. It actually helps process. There is small grants from the federal government and from the legislature for school resource officers, not nearly enough to cover all our schools as we've heard they need to be covered today. We've now begun conducting quarterly meetings with law enforcement, school administrators from traditional and charter schools, bringing all these different folks to the table. I might reach out to some of you and see if it's possible to participate in our next one. But one of the interesting things I learned as I would do openings for these different meetings that we had is I did a little research on school shootings. And actually the very first one in America was in or near Greencastle, Pennsylvania in 1764. So that's how long we've had incidents in our schools. But one of the things I learned as I studied, and this is anecdotal, not scientific by any stretch of the imagination, but it seemed in the past there was, it was a catalyst. It might have been a lover's quarrel between two adults that worked at the school, or a student who was furious at a teacher, something like that. Not what seemed to be the random acts that we're seeing, and the massness, although some of them were pretty large in the number of victims they had. It just seemed to be a different type of motivation as the things that we see our children struggling with today. And does it come from social media? Does it come from the breakdown of the family? All of the above. There's enough blame to go around for everybody. But again, I think I'll just close, if I can take just another moment to share with you a little kind of segue back to my lesson from Parkland. We've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations here in Arizona. When I originally ran for this office, I ran to repeal and replace Common Core, and we've done that. We're moving forward with new science and history standards, but what I've come to realize is they're not going to get our children where they need to be. Academically, in my opinion, they're not significant enough. But the piece that's really missing is that other piece that I talked about in the very beginning, making our children successful citizens of this nation. You know, we're blessed in this country. We have an education system unlike others, many others around the world, where our children, our goal is that we get all children educated, but we get them educated to follow their dreams, their goals, and their ambitions. In many places around this world, kids will still take a test to this day, and the government will tell them, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a gardener, or whatever you may be. That's not what we believe here. But the underpinning of that is that our children have to understand what our country is, what it means, what the rights are, and why it is so imperative that they protect them, not just for themselves, but for the future generations and the children that come after them. So just to close, I just wanted to share some information with you. Anybody here ever heard of Hillsdale College? Okay, a few of you. So, my time in office is short, I'm sure you're very aware of that, and I don't have as much time as I had hoped to get us to a better place. So when we have a State Board of Ed meeting this Monday, I'm going to bring to them the Hillsdale Barney Charter School Scope and Sequence Standards. And I believe if we in Arizona implement that, then we will truly have our chance to make our children the citizens that they need to be to protect our country. And with that, I'm sure we'll have some more discussion on school safety, but I think that's a piece of it too. If they don't understand what this greatest gift is, this American exceptionalism that we've been gifted from God, we will not continue. So with that, I want to thank you all very much again for coming. I look forward to speaking with you individually, and may God continue to bless our children, our state, and our nation. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to do.
Time's up.
I wanted to get this piece of paper. I wanted to thank the team that worked tirelessly, and I will say that, we put one of them in bed. He's home recovering from working on the team. Well, we have Angie Anderson, who's running up there probably looking for sandwiches. Don and Patty Woolley, who have been a big support here. Bob Fox worked on the team, and Dr. Kathleen Wishnick and Dr. Yale Wishnick. We're all on this team along with me and my lovely wife, who disappeared. Okay. Anyway, they all worked real hard. I want to thank the panelists for what they've done. Give them a round. To be here. And I want to thank you guys so much for caring for our children and our grandchildren and our teachers, because if we can implement this, we'll be saving their lives too. As you may remember from Parkland, the coach that stood between the shooter and the kids and took 3 rounds for the kids.